Evening, everybody. So my name is Shantae Kasner. I am currently Dean for Academic Success at Northeast Lakeview College. I want to affirm and celebrate that that is a community college because I'm very passionate about community college work. So that's important for me that people recognize the community college as a viable space and an important and significant space, particularly around matters of equity. And we should always be included in conversations with universities as well, but that's, my co-panelists will tell you that's not always the case. And so, but I'm always delighted to partake in conversations with my colleagues across the spectrum of higher education. Dr. B and I go back. Well, I knew her as Miss Bayham at Xavier University Preparatory High School, where I graduated class of 1996. I say that proudly. I am a native of New Orleans, born in the 7th Ward, raised in New Orleans East. And that means a lot to me. So, and that's a critical part of my identity. That's a critical part of why I got into the role, into education. So I want to celebrate that. And I'm blessed to be able to say in high school, those were significant formative years, not just for me as a woman, but in terms of my Black racial identity. And my commitment to equity, I think, began because of the passion and convictions of the people who poured into me when I was a student at Xavier Prep. So I could not say no to Dr. B's request, and I love her so much that this is my 15th meeting today, literally. And I'm here.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And Dr. Barnes, will continue with you.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me. I'm Mark Barnes. I serve as Vice President for Institutional Advancement at Dillard University, where I have spent most of the last 20 years. There was a 4-year gap between 2009 and 2013 that I decided I was going to do something else with my career. And went to an arts organization in New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Foundation. But quickly realized that education is my passion. Dillard University is my passion, and HBCUs are my passion. And so when Dillard got a new president and was looking for a VP, I applied and was blessed enough to get that position. So I've been back at Dillard now for the past 7 years. And doing my best to just make a difference in the lives of students. For those who don't know what institutional advancement is, basically the primary role is fundraising. So my job is to obtain resources for the institution to do all kinds of things. The thing that I spend most of my time with is trying to find money for students to be able to stay in school. But we raise money to do, all sorts of things. In my spare time, if there is such a thing, I spend a lot of time doing community work. I am committed to the cause of racial justice. This is not something that started for me with George Floyd. This is something that I've been doing for years. In fact, at Dillard in 2014, we hosted a Black Male Summit with high school students and the chief of police and DA. And so I've been doing this work for a long time and trying to understand the intersection between education and justice. And I'm still trying to figure it out. I can't say that I've done that just yet, but but I work toward it every day. And so I am proud to have one of, I know he will introduce himself, but one of our students, Dillard students, Noah Armstrong, I invited him. He'll tell you who he is, but I invited him because of the work that he's already doing as a young college student in the realm of justice, criminal justice particularly. This is just one example of where my passion is. He is a fine young man. I have a son, but and I'm blessed to have a son. But when people like Noah come into my life, I think that I feel like they're my sons as well. So I wanted him to come and share a little bit with us too.
Thank you, Mr. Ambrose.
Good evening, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Good. My name is Timothy Ambrose, graduate of Xavier University, class of 2019. I'm actually currently right now, I'm a mitigation specialist with the Louisiana Center for Children's Rights. So for everyone who may not know what a mitigation specialist is, basically I conduct client interviews with my clients at Angola Penitentiary and other prisons throughout the state of Louisiana, develop and prepare bio, psycho, social histories for each client, each individual client in their cases, and which helps me basically conduct fact investigation and mitigating factors for each client. So, my passion basically lies in, the Black community and helping young Black males and trying to derail the prison to pipeline, school to prison pipeline, basically. So.
Thank you. And now our two student panelists. Noah, we'll start with you.
Thank y'all for having me. Good evening to everyone. My name is Noah Armstrong. I'm a rising junior from Dallas, Texas, as you can see my background. And right now I currently intern at a law firm here in Dallas called the Ward Law Group. And I just serve as a legal clerk. So I basically do whatever my boss tells me to do. But my passion is also in criminal justice and just kind of making a better road and a better avenue for Black students to make it out of their situations. Because I do believe that this issue is, way deeper than just Black Lives Matter. I think it's a economic issue and an education issue. And I think as Black students, it's our job to kind of look into that and hold each other accountable, as a race and as a country for what's going on. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. And then Troy.
Good afternoon, everyone. Apologies for my tardiness. I had a few technological issues, but my name is Troy Pitt II. I'm currently a rising senior at Loyola, majoring in digital filmmaking. Currently, I'm a cameraman for a documentary that they're currently shooting in New Orleans. I don't know if any of you all know of Lincoln Beach, or have a few family members that might have attended Lincoln Beach. So we're currently working on a documentary, in addition to like revitalizing the beach and like hosting like weekly, like they call them cleanup and chills. Basically, just trying to bring more awareness to Lincoln Beach and like the history that it has. Which kind of indirectly ties into the topic we have today, but I'm really excited to kind of enter this dialogue with everyone.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for giving us your background. So we will jump right in. First, I'd like you to talk about any personal experiences or any personal reflections since this whole resurgence has come up. And I'll just tell you briefly, like, of course, this has impacted all of us. And this topic really was a brainchild for me, like even after all of this had been so prevalent in the news. And then for the situation to happen with the Spelman and Morehouse student, then that just shook me to my core. And I was like, okay, this is gonna be a topic on Dr. B's Thursday Thoughts. So what, like just personally, how has this impacted you? Any personal reflections to start us off before we just get into the college realm and university student specific topic? Anybody can start off.
All right. Well, for me, when the thing with George Floyd happened, I had to wait to watch the video because my wife to this day has not watched it and she won't. So I wanted to make sure that she wasn't with me when I watched it. I didn't watch it the day that it was first shown on social media. I watched it the next day and it broke me. And then I started looking at the reactions of my friends. And there's one thing that you know about, I'm a 50-year-old black man. As a 50-year-old black man, you were taught as a kid, you don't cry, you don't show emotion, you got to be a man. And so most of my good friends who are around my age, people who I've never seen be emotional, were all breaking down at the sight of what we witnessed. And I knew then it was time for us to take this thing to another level. And so I can tell you, I wasn't well then, and I'm not well now. Just mentally dealing with, we're already dealing, of course, with the pandemic and all that has. You try to run a university in the middle of a pandemic, or a community college. I agree with you that those are very important. It is very stressful. It's very tough. Now we're dealing with this issue, and we're dealing with the issue of crime in our streets that we're committing against each other. Like, I'm grappling with all of this stuff and figuring out, what the heck do I do with this? How can I be part of some kind of solution for this? And so for a long time, I felt, in a sense, hopeless. I felt powerless. And I'm beginning to emerge from that now, and think about this in other ways. But I'm just going to be honest with you. It's been very tough. Personally, for me, it's been very tough mentally.
I would echo that. I think we're all going to say the same thing. Like, this is not an easy time to be Black. However, I don't know when an easy time to be Black ever was in this nation. So at my college, we did a community forum, and I was asked to set the context and to just kind of give some updates about what had been happening in contemporary media. But instead, I shared, if we must die, let it not be like hogs, hunted and pinned in an inglorious spot, while round us bark the mad and hungry dogs, making a mock of our accursed lot. So Claude McKay's If We Must Die was written 101 years ago during the Red Summer in this country. Race riots were happening across this country during that time in major metropolitan areas. And Black people were fighting the same issues, fighting the same oppressive knees on our necks. And it's 101 years later. So for me, I've not been okay. I've been sad, I've been hurt, but I've been mad. I've been angry. And not really knowing what to do with that anger, because we fight and we learn methods for surviving racism, while the nation and so many people try to put on Black people that it is our responsibility to fix racism, and no white person is involved in that, right? And we didn't create racism. And so giving us the burden of having to fix it wears us out. But we are masterful survivors, right? We are masterful at that. And so I think at this point in my life, I've been more angry than any other point in my life. But when I was a student at Loyola, you couldn't have told anybody that. They would have thought I was angrier then. But I've been more angry now that we're still here and people are trying to use the same strategies for overcoming, meaning putting the work on Black people. I love that white people are getting involved right now, but it's not enough of them in certain powerful positions. And we can talk about the politics of higher education, Mark and Tim, and those of us who have gone through these systems completely, right? There are not enough people with a certain type of power who are seeing this differently. So God bless the Karens that want to join in a protest, but those Karens sometimes have no power, and I need the ones with power to get involved a bit more.
I got a few things, just piggybacking off of everything you all just said. And apologies, I got a few jitters I got to get through as I talk. But I think anger aside, I think one of the interesting things about the power of, I guess, that statement and like the movement itself is like the timing of it. Like, it's extremely, extremely unfortunate that it takes another death to kind of get people to offer some level of sympathy, empathy, whatever you want to call it, towards like this issue that's been ongoing. Black Lives Matter has been around for a number of years. Furthermore, like, we see this same kind of, like, I don't know, people have been protesting with similar, whether it be Black Lives Matter or I Am a Man, like, similar statements have kind of been recycled or kind of re-edited kind of for this. What's the best way to describe what I'm saying? I think basically at the core, what I'm trying to say is interesting, the timing of it, just because you have to realize everybody is inside during COVID. The majority of us were inside for almost like a month plus. There's only so much Netflix, Hulu, whatever it is that you can kind of entertain yourself with. And while all this is happening, people are wearing masks, people can't attend places. What was it? 40 million plus people like on unemployment. Like, we're all kind of going through these things at the same time. And then you see another Black man kind of get killed. Ain't no kinda, he gets killed on camera. Whether it's horrific or not, it's another death taken by this system that kind of has been doing this to us continuously. And it's kind of like, if this happens while the world technically to a degree is kind of on rest, and y'all can't kind of put that to rest for, you know, this moment in time, you have all of these people who are like stressed economically, health-wise, any other way that you kind of think, and you kind of combine all that together, and you have the current movement that's going on. There were protests, I think it might have been a month and a half ago. It was all 50 states, and additionally, I don't want to say the wrong number, but it might have been like 20 other countries where people are, and I'm not saying necessarily just because a whole bunch of people are marching that signals a particular type of change, but it definitely signals a particular type of change in like the mindsets of certain individuals. And that's kind of that first step, I guess, towards any level of progress that we are trying to reach or still trying to, I guess, tread through. Yeah, for the most part.
I'll chime in. I think for me, I've just been reflecting on the climates in which the change agents before us have made. You know, it was never a easy climate. For example, with like AP Turo in the 1930s, you know, being the only Black attorney trying to fight for Black rights in the state of Louisiana. And you think about like the amount of courage and perseverance he had to have in the face of all of the hate and potentially death threats coming against him, but he still had in his mind, like, I have to keep going, you know, I have to. So I've been thinking about those guys and trying to just put together some kind of solution for this time in particular. And it's not a easy solution to come up with. It's draining emotionally, you know, because we have so many emotions, like everyone has stated. Our emotions are everywhere, you know, facing a pandemic and, you know, facing basically, I don't want to say, you know, tyranny, but it's almost as if like facing a government that's looking us in the face and saying, hey, we don't care. Like, we're going to continue to upkeep this systemic hatred towards people with melanin, you know. So for me to look at that and think about those guys who made a way for me to be here today, I just think, you know, I have to have some type of grit, you know, to be able to come up with a solution, and you know, just formulate a way to control my emotions and channel my energy into that solution instead of letting them take me over, you know. But that's all.
Just in addition to what was said, just being a college student at a HBCU, I think after the George Floyd, well, after I found out about it, I kind of had like a fed up attitude. Like I was fed up because I remember being 12 and hearing about Trayvon Martin, and you just think about like just kind of seeing like every summer, you know, somebody, or every year's, you know, we're hashtagging somebody and we're protesting, and it's kind of like we're fed up. Like we've witnessed the whole, because you know it's kind of like a new generation's coming up, and they're kind of seeing like, you know, how history repeats itself, and how, you know, Black people are still getting harassed and still having harsh punishment and still getting, you know, heavier sentencing and stuff like that. And it's like we realize that it's a systematic issue, but just as an HBCU college student, what's my role in that, and what's my part? And so I've taken it amongst myself to just kind of encourage students and talk to students about what really matters in a time like this. Because I also went to my first protest after George Floyd died, and excuse me, but it kind of shook me, because I realized that while I was at that protest, um, I witnessed peaceful moments, and I witnessed moments of power, and I witnessed moments of promoting people to go out and vote. But then I also witnessed the riots, and I also witnessed the terror. And one thing that kind of stood out to me after going to my first protest was that after, you know, going home and seeing what's on the news, and seeing a reaction of your family. And what kind of took me off was is that on the news, they didn't show any of the peaceful protesting. They didn't show any of the moments where they promoted people to go out and vote. They didn't show the moments where we prayed over the families who had lost somebody. They showed just the rioting. They showed just the violence. They showed just when the police came in with tear gas. And it's like, what is the image that they're trying to show people out there, that Black people are, you know, this type of way, and they're just about violence? And but no, like it's more than that. And I think it's time, as you know, college students, that we show the full picture. We show the bigger picture of why we're doing all of this. So that's my statement.
Thank you. These next two questions, Dr. Gazna and Dr. Barnes, I asked the two of you to specifically address these two questions. The first one being, how does an African-American student in this time and in this space handle subtle racism, or overt racism for that matter, on a college campus? And what types of structural racism are there in place on college campuses? And I know that they're in place both at PWIs and HBCUs, unfortunately. Like, it just depends on who you're up against that particular day, like what college professor feels like they hold your life in their hands. So if the two of you could speak to that.
I was trying to let you go first. So to address what the students' roles in this, right, and what students, college students, I think the first thing that has to happen is we have to provide opportunities and safe spaces for students to be able to speak freely and without the fear of repercussions. I think that's easier on an HBCU campus. I think it's much more difficult on PWI and PWIs, because you're not only dealing with, um, uh, talk about, structural racism, you're dealing with professors, you're dealing with administrators who feel like this. My wife, who was the athletic director at Dillard, was on a call with college presidents NAIA Athletic Association college presidents a few days ago. And she talked about a comment that was made by one of the presidents that we're going through the Chinese curse. This was a comment made by a college president. So this is what students are dealing with. When a comment like that comes from the top of an institution, where is the incentive for those who report under him or her to do anything better than that? So now a student has to go and operate in that environment. We have to get to a point where students are allowed to be free to say, this is not right. I'm feeling this way, I'm feeling that way. I think it has to start there. If you look at, I don't want to give a history lesson, but if you look at the origin of higher education in the United States, and from the founding of Harvard University, which was the very first institution, you have to look at who were those institutions created for. Wealthy white men. And it was 200 years after the founding of the first higher institution on this land that the first Black institution, which was Cheney University, started. 200 years later. And then you have to go and look at, when the Morrill Act was passed. The Morrill Act was actually the legislation that created land grant institutions, right? And those land grant institutions were created for white people. It took a second Morrill Act during the midst of the Civil War in 1890 to get passed, and that legislation basically said you have to not use race as a criterion for admission to your land grant institutions, or you have to build them anew. What do you think they did? They built new, different institutions so that they wouldn't have to admit them. But nothing in the act said you had to fund those institutions the same way. Nothing said that you had to build the same kinds of campuses that those other institutions had. So to understand racism in a higher education setting, you have to really understand where we came from as an industry. If you look at how institutions, I work in fundraising, and we're always grateful for every grant that we get from a foundation. But if you look at how foundations funded institutions, PWIs, and then you look at how they funded our institutions, HBCUs, you'll see there's a huge gap. So the whole notion of systematic racism can be found in the very origin of higher education in this country. And so we're dealing with that because now our students have to deal with, so I want to approach this from two different directions, then I'm going to let Dr. Ricasson speak. Our students who attend HBCUs have to attend institutions where the highest endowment of any HBCU is Howard University with about $630 million endowment. The highest for PWI is Harvard with $40 billion. The wealth gap that HBCUs face is something that is very real for these students, and it impacts their educational access and opportunities. Then the other side of it is those African American students who attend PWI, predominantly white institutions, have to deal with a whole system of racism. How do they approach their professor? How do they interact with their professors? How do they interact with the financial aid counselors? How do they interact with the president who thinks they're under a Chinese curse? So we have to be able to, in higher education, allow students to speak and say what is on their minds in a way that they're not afraid that there's going to be some repercussions because of what they're thinking. We have to start with allowing them to voice these opinions and then listening to what they're saying and being willing to to make changes based on their feedback. Sorry, I went too long.
Amen, amen, Brother Barnes. I think the way that I would approach this response a little differently, Dr. B, is that I think a part of what we have to be responsible for is helping Black people know that when they step into these spaces, per your historical narrative, these spaces have never been safe spaces. That's educational lingo that we use. We need to create safe spaces for. We need to create, but these spaces, institutions of higher education, educational institutions, period, have never been safe, inherently safe spaces for Black, brown, Native bodies, right? So, but we're talking about Black bodies today, and especially, so I'll keep it to that. But I wanna be real, real sort of honest about our responsibility, irrespective of your level of intelligence, irrespective of your ACT score and SAT score, irrespective of the type of institution you choose to attend, whether that is an HBCU, a PWI, a traditional state college, a flagship state college, an Ivy League, a community college. These institutions have not been designed and developed in a way to honor who you are as a Black person. Instead, they were directly constructed. The construction of the university was intended to sanitize an elite, an academic and educational elite group, and to precisely, now I used to teach English composition, right? And English composition has been a discipline that has been weaponized against difference. So if we understand that white, male, upper class, middle class, linguistic normal has been the beacon or the metric against which all linguistic performance has been made, that's a course across this country. No matter what your decision is about a professional field, you gotta take composition. You either have to come in with the credit or you have to take a class. Everybody doesn't have to take physics, but everybody's gotta take English composition. You've got to demonstrate your capacity to acculturate to white linguistic performance, first and foremost, before you are deemed intelligent. And if we can't see today in the curricular structures that that's inherently racist, right? That is, it's inherently exclusive, but that was the intention. So as many scholars have noted in cultural studies, composition courses have been border crossings, intellectual border crossings, essentially for lots of groups. And it becomes pronounced as you journey throughout this space that you can get as much of the intelligence you can articulate in the finest way, but you are still, as a good friend of mine would say, they're gonna still see your paint job. And so the system is not designed for you. When you have that knowledge, when you have that awareness, when we stop telling our kids and our loved ones, if you just stay quiet, if you just do as you're told, if you just whatever, if we stop grooming a respectability politic instead of training our young people to fight these systems and to be bold and audacious in their pursuit of whatever their goals are in these systems, then I think when they encounter, because they will encounter, when they encounter the impact or the symptom of racism in the system, it won't hurt as much. The problem is, I think right now, what breaks my heart is when I see, again, you know a broken system when what's the data they keep? Y'all are students, what's the record being tracked? Noah and Troy, they're tracking your success in a way that's more distinct than the way that they're tracking the members of Sigma Phi Epsilon's success in their colleges, right? They're tracking your success. We have a national data rhetoric that says we need to understand what's happening with Black boys because they're not doing well. And that's the story, as if it's a Black boy problem. Not that it's a racist system problem or a racist institution problem. It's a Black boy problem. So let me love on them, let me hug them, let me fix them, not let me fix this system. That's how we do education data gathering. So we know that, right? But when you know that, then you can navigate this system with a greater sense of power. And I just think that we do too much work coaching and grooming our students into how our people, our children, our little brothers and sisters and cousins, we do too much work coaching and grooming them into how to be acceptable socially in someone's eye, instead of really sharing and passing on the knowledge about navigating these systems. That's the social capital that white people have, and they've been able to navigate in this world that we don't empower our people with, generation by generation by generation. So echo Brother Barnes, but I think our responsibility is not to warn our, or talk about how we're going to fix these systems. These systems been broke. We are masterful survivors, and we will be masterful survivors. These systems been broke, but we ain't never been broke. So we have all that's needed within us to navigate these systems successfully. I just think we have to be aware that the challenge is going to come, because when we get surprised, sometimes that's the part that breaks our hearts and breaks our spirits. So we shouldn't be surprised when the racism hits us, when we know the racism is there.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you. And then that actually brings me to my next question. Like, are we ever going to get to a time and a space? And Tim, I'll actually let you start with this question, and then I'll kick it over to the college students, because this was actually something that Tim brought up in our earlier conversation that we had. Are we ever going to get to a generation that does not face this? And if so, how are we going to get there? Tim, I'll let you start.
Okay. I remember that conversation. We were talking, and I said that we should be the last generation. Another generation shouldn't have to fight the battles that we're fighting today, like we're fighting the battles that our ancestors and our grandfathers fought for us. And I think that everybody who is affected by these injustices and these systems, I think that if we develop and have a very strong sense of empathy, with a notion that, we have to, we can't give up, because at some point it could be one of us, or it could be someone that we're related to that's going to go through this. It's almost as if nobody left behind, and it just goes back to my initial statement from earlier. Those guys, the AP2 roles and the Thurgood Marshalls, they chartered these courses fearlessly. They were fighting to say, hey, I have an end goal. I know it's not going to end tomorrow. I know that racism is not going to go away no time soon, but I'm going to fight with everything in me so that the next generation will have it a little bit better than I had. They'll have more opportunities than I had. I think that, just committing ourselves to the change, at every level, in every sector of this society. And it has to be a collective effort. One person can't do it. One class of people can't do it. One group or age of people can't do it. It takes the entire community to do it. And I think that's the starting point, to raise some awareness to everybody that, if we want to see that change, then we all have stakes in this thing,
Thank you. And then Noah and Troy, how are the two of you embracing this moment? I know, Noah, you mentioned that you were a part of a protest. Like, what other parts of student activism have the two of you been involved in? I know we'll begin with you and then Troy.
So I actually am the president of this organization on Dillard's campus called the National Association of Blacks in Criminal Justice. And our goal is to engage students with fighting this fight, getting active, becoming civil activists. And a big part of the organization is giving students a platform to, say how they feel, advocate for people, advocate for what they believe in. And so recently we had a panel with the national organization, and it was a wonderful panel. I think over 100 people had tuned in on Zoom, and we had discussions similar to this, talking about, how do we move forward and what is the direction that our criminal justice system is headed in. And just to echo what Dr. Barnes said earlier, I really think it has to do with economics, it has to do with education. And I think that a big problem that we have in the Black community is that a lot of our people are they're targets. Like police target them, if you're in school, a teacher will target them, and it's like almost harassment, to a point where you feel kind of like diminished, you feel kind of put down. And this has been happening for so many generations, and it's been happening for so long that a lot of people have become okay with that. Like it's okay to be mediocre, it's okay to not do something with your life, and it's not, because we need more people who are pushing us forward. We need more people who are getting active in this fight. And I think a problem that I see in my community, because I'm from Dallas, Texas, and for so long I grew up thinking that, everything's okay. Martin Luther King did what he had to do, Malcolm X did what he had to do, Rosa Parks, all these great people did what they had to do. And, we're fine now. Most of my friends growing up were white people and Hispanic people. And it wasn't until I got to high school and I interned at a courthouse here in Dallas, and I saw that when you go to the courthouse, it was nothing but Black people or Hispanics or minorities. And it almost seemed like, you would see them in the hallways and they would be chained up one after another, like in a line. And they look like slaves. Like I cannot make this up. Just in the courthouse, and I'm just looking like, this is really, these are my people. And I started thinking, why is most of the people in here Black? Like there has to be something going on, because there were people close to my age, 16, 15, 17-year-old people, and they looked like, they were slaves in a courthouse. And it just didn't like, something about it just didn't touch me the same way. And I realized from that point that we need to fix this issue, because while we see that most of the people who are going to jail are Black and minorities, we don't see that same representation for like their lawyers. Like most of their lawyers were white people, or most of the judges were white people, and they would give them 5-7 years for small crimes, or they would treat their case with not enough delicacy. When they wouldn't treat it delicate, they would just say, well, you did this crime, you're going to jail. Well, what about when they get out of jail and they don't have any opportunities, they don't have any job opportunities, they can't vote, you rip away all their rights, and that's when I started getting into mass incarceration and how it's systematic. Like we're expected to go to jail, we're expected not to do something with our lives, we're expected not to go to college. And just looking at the statistics of how many Black males are in college, and how I'm fortunate to be in college right now as a Black male in America, like that's scary. Like But but what was more scary is how I thought that everything was okay, you know, for a long time. How I thought that, you know, this was life. And too many Black people are just being okay with what we have in front of us. But I learned that it was people like Thurgood Marshall or Charles Hamilton Houston who thought intentionally, who did studies, who, you know, went and fought for our rights and did stuff intentionally to get us to where we are now. But, you know, I think it's up to us, you know, this new generation, to use the resources that we have, because I feel like the sky is the limit sometimes, just being where we are right now. But I feel like a lot of times we're not applying ourselves, and we're not applying our resources, and we're not unifying. I know it was a lot of unity involved with moving our people forward, and we're not seeing a lot of unity. We're seeing more division. We're seeing, you know, people, like Dr. Barnes said, you know, Black on Black crime. And I hate talking about Black on Black crime because it's always used as, it's kind of like an excuse, or it's kind of like no, it's okay for police to kill Black people because Black people kill Black people. But that's not like, I don't think that equates to that. I think that Black people are killing Black people because they're in these situations that were basically inherited by, you know, other generations that came before them. And I think that it's up to us to break these generational curses of you know, people not going to college and people not doing something with their lives. Like, it's up to us as educated Black people to change that narrative for the people who come after us. Because like Tim said, like, I'm fed up, and I don't think we should have to deal with this right now, because of the blood, the sweat, and tears that our ancestors sacrificed for us to get to this point. Like, we should be at a point right now where we're focusing on fixing that wealth gap. We're focusing on, you know, sending more Black people in college instead of focusing on, you know, police brutality, and instead of focusing on why do white people think it's okay to harass and kill Black people. So I really think that it starts with the people who are educated and the people who do know, because a lot of information is political. A lot of information, like, it was so much I learned at my HBCU that I didn't learn at my public school back in Dallas, Texas. You know, like, the curriculum that we're taught, the lessons that we're taught. What about our culture that we're taught? What about our people that we're taught? And I'm not gonna lie to you, a lot of that information I wasn't fed until I got to college. And that's scary too, because our Black kids aren't being educated on their royal history and their royal heritage. Instead, they're seeing, you know, their brothers and sisters getting locked up, or their parents getting locked up, and thinking that that's their only option, that's their only route, and they could either play basketball or rap, or, you know, or sell drugs to make it out of their community. Versus, you know, there's people who pay the way for you to do this. There's people who sacrifice so you can vote. There's people who sacrifice so you can have this type of job and do this type of opportunity. So I
Right.
think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to go on to Troy because we're running a little short on time. Troy.
Yeah. So in regards to, if I can answer the question you asked us and then kind of touch on the question you offered Tim earlier. In regards to, I guess, like specific activism, I went to high school in Baton Rouge, and I was a part of this college readiness program called BRIC, Baton Rouge Youth Coalition. And whenever Alton Sterling got killed, and obviously all of us went high school, students, myself, along with a plethora of others, and like some of our administrators that were above us, they kind of organized like a march on the Capitol. They had like a vigil and those types of things. Recently, whenever like we had a few protesters kind of stop traffic on I-10 a few weeks back, I went out to protest, not knowing we were, you know, gonna go on I-10 and shut it down. But that was to a degree an exhilarating feeling. But the one thing I will say, I definitely realized first probably at the Alton Sterling protest that like, I don't want this to kind of come off the wrong way, but marching isn't everybody has their role, you know, and I kind of realized marching for me isn't the most effective role in kind of, I guess, fighting the fight to a degree. Because in high school, like I really appreciated the fact that I was a part of like a team of people that kind of put on this, that brought awareness to like this issue. But like we're protesting police brutality and we have to get permission from the police for the actual march that we're doing to protest what it is that they just did like the weekend prior, you know? I'm getting permission from the very institution that I'm protesting to protest them, just for them to, you know, block off a few streets. And I'm yelling at the top of my lungs, losing my voice. And like after those 2 hours, it's kind of like, okay, well, that was nice. And it's kind of like, okay, well, what do you continue to do? When I went to the second protest, I don't know, like I said earlier, like just being cooped up inside and seeing all this kind of happening on the screen. And then in addition to that, I had a very close friend of mine go through something very similar. They weren't killed or anything like that, but it happened like the day prior. And it was so much frustration, I had to kind of get it off in a particular way. So I went out and I kind of like marched it off and yelled it off. And once I did that, it was still kind of like, okay, what do I do now? And in regards to, I guess, my role in whatever particular activism, at the core, I'm an artist, basically. Like, I don't know, you know, I pick up a camera and I try to create things and show things through my lens to kind of bring better awareness to certain things or offer new insights to a particular thing. So I don't know, I can't give any specific things that I know I can do, but I do know that's like the avenue that I can do it through, you know what I'm saying? To kind of touch on the question you offered Tim a little bit earlier about how do we make sure this is the last generation that has to kind of go through this. I don't say this hopelessly, but I feel like there's no real way for us to like guarantee that, just because, for example, like if you go back and look at, you know, interviews of Angela Davis when she was younger, or even Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Stokely Carmichael, all these different people, a lot of the talking points that they are, you know, talking about is the same things that people on CNN are talking about like today. The only thing that changes are like variances in kind of like detail and the type of language that's used, you know what I'm saying? But racism, you have a structure that is founded in racism because the individuals that created it are racist. They can't help but create a system that feeds their needs to a degree. And then you have racism itself, which to a degree, I don't want to say is abstract, but it wears many faces. So like, for example, you know, redlining was a very big thing, still to a degree is, but it was a very, very big thing like the 60s and the 70s, right? They didn't have internet back then. But now, with the new, I guess you could call online real estate, whatever you want to call it, if you type in Black people on Google versus white people on Google, there's discrepancies kind of even in representation of Black people online. Like if you type in white people, you'll find a whole bunch of, you know, smiling portraits that you might see on like stock pictures and like frames and those sorts of things. Type in Black people on Google, you see a whole bunch of mugshots or just something that would shine a negative light on us. So basically what I'm trying to kind of hit on is racism evolves as different things, whether it be technological or like new advances kind of come along, it'll find its way into whatever new stream of whatever it is that's being created, or you kind of get what I'm saying. As technological advances and different things come about, racism itself is kind of going to adjust to a degree and find a way to kind of implement itself in that. So I think at the core of whatever it is, before we could kind of tackle racism itself, because it's like an ideology, you know what I'm saying? You have to tackle the systems that perpetuate that ideology or kind of allow it to flourish. And only, I feel like once we kind of dismantle the current systems that enable it, then we'll kind of be able to, you know, meet the rubber at the road, kind of, so to speak, to a degree. That's the best way to kind of sum it up.
Yeah, thank you. We're wrapping up. I just want to ask everybody if we could go around just for a minute to give any final thoughts. But in your final thoughts, you know, everybody's hyped up. We had those murders back to back, and that kind of brought on this resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement. But in your final thoughts, if you could also address where you see the Black Lives Matter movement 5 years from now. If we could just each take a minute, we could go around, and Dr. Rakasna, we'll start with you.
So I'll wrap up kind of commenting on some of the language that I've heard from our young brothers as a part of this panel as it relates to Black Lives Matter. While this movement has been given a name or a title, this activism has been present in our community for a very long time. So it didn't start this summer, and it's not going to end at this summer, right? And I think to really hone in on what I think is really important about honoring the whole of Black lives, recognize that we have all also, as we become intelligent and educated, we're all being educated in systems that limit our access to knowledge about our people. And so it frames narratives. It is so common that we talk about Black accomplishment as Black heroes, and we talk about Black movements as all unity and all unified. That's not true. That's not history, and that's not honoring all lives. Black Lives Matters is about recognizing the human equity in our existence. And when we deny the full scope of humanity, when we talk about ourselves, then we're not operating as though Black Lives Matter for us, whether somebody has their knee on our neck or not. As humans, we are a mixture of good and bad. So we have people who struggle and people who succeed. And if we can't honor that and celebrate that, instead of turning a critical eye inward, because every culture has good and bad. So we have to be cautious about not allowing our desires for progress and our survival to buy into an understated rhetoric of anti-Black life that says we have to be great accomplishers, or we have to be achievers, or we have to be unified in order to be valued and mattering, in order to matter and have significance. So I thank you for letting me be a part of this panel. I celebrate the work that you're doing, Dr. B, and I celebrate the efforts of all of the brothers that I was able and fortunate to have as partners on this panel. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Ambrose?
5 years from now, Black Lives Matter movement, I think that my prediction is that we'll experience a proliferation of Black movements in every sector of our nation, you know, rooted in making sure that Black lives, a Black life is receptive and included in all agendas. I think we're seeing that today with a lot of big companies taking a shift towards honoring Black life. And I think that's like Noah said, that the economic factor, you know, because they want to save face, they want to save their companies. So they're going to honor Black life. It's almost as if it's become a advertising component, a mechanism to draw more business into these companies. So I think that if we spin this the right way as a community, we can definitely see the light at the end of the tunnel. I want to highlight that policy change and community accountability is something that we need to hone in on as well. As my grandmother would say, you pour a good bucket of milk, but then you kick it over. You know, we would do something great in the community. Let's say we rename Jeff Davis Parkway to Norman C. Francis Parkway, but then the next day there's a rash of shootings in the Black community, you know. So we have to, on every aspect, in every cylinder, we have to be hitting on every cylinder. It has to be accountability you know? And I was having this conversation the other day about how as Black people, you know, we're all not seeking knowledge to try to basically solve this problem. You know, some people are, I heard it earlier, some people are complacent, you know, in their lives, and they accepted that this is what life is, you know, and it's on us, the ones who are seeking knowledge and who have similar upbringings, and we found solutions to go back and help those people who need those solutions. And I think that, you know, by doing that, and also just going back to the accountability thing, we have to hold each other accountable. I think that's a key part. Just as much as we hold the police accountable, we have to hold ourselves accountable too.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Noah.
Yeah, just to add on to what has already been said, I think that Black Lives Matter 5 years from now, I would hope it would translate into more service and more giving back to the community in forms of mentorship and I think really like attacking the youth and, well, not attacking the youth, but really engaging the youth and just encouraging them to not, you know, not be complacent and not let this kind of sit, because hopefully 5 years from now, we will make some reform. We will make some policy adjustments that will allow for more funding to go into our communities and for more, I guess, justice within our criminal justice system. I think a big part about Black Lives Matter that I'm concerned about is how many Black lives are going to jail and then re-entering jail, because that's a big issue. Like, there's so many people who get locked up and go to jail, and then they get out and then they end up going to jail again because they don't have a way to support themselves. So they just kind of fall back into those bad habits. But I think Black lives should matter. Kind of what Tim was saying, like Black lives should matter to each other too. So we should see more mentoring. We should see more giving back to the community. We should see more rappers and entertainers not just promoting chains and sagging and getting the girls, but also, you know, financial literacy, and, you know, things that are solid, things that are tangible for everybody in the Black community. And I think that another good point Tim said that I was thinking about was how many companies basically profited from Black Lives Matter, because you saw, you know, Netflix and Disney Plus and Instagram and Apple Music, all these people kind of add like a Black sector to their application, saying like, okay, you can access, you know, all the Black music, you can access all the Black movies, you can access, you know, you can celebrate Black people and Black lives through our applications. But I think we should use that and use that momentum to take it further and say, well, if you're gonna do that, you also need to go ahead and fund, you know, some Black programming and fund some Black HBCUs, or, you know, I think we should use that that leverage, you know, to kind of advance ourselves, because this is more than a hashtag, and a lot of people see it as just a hashtag. So I think we should be intentional with what we do with Black Lives Matter, and in the next 5 years, we'll see some progress, hopefully. Thank you for having me on the panel.
Thank you. Thank you for being here, Noah. Troy.
There we go. 5 years from now, I honestly do not know what it looks like. I'm pretty, like, I don't know. I feel like some of these same questions are questions they were asking during the civil rights movement. What does the movement look like 5 years from then? And I'm pretty sure back then I could speak on things that I would hope, but ultimately at the core, I really don't know. One thing I do feel like I feel like I can guarantee is that it definitely 5 years from now will be extremely more inclusive than historically it usually is. And that's regarding just people, well, obviously Black people, you know what I'm saying? A few more races, regardless of sexual identity, those sorts of things. It'll be a lot more accepting. And kind of touching on what Noah and Tim spoke on earlier in regards to like a lot of these companies buying into Black Lives Matter currently, just because I think it's interesting because for all these companies to buy into that idea, for them to do that, they have to recognize that people currently are not playing about, like, I don't know, very simply, people just kind of aren't playing about people who aren't supporting causes or aren't supporting certain things apologies, Ms. Shantae said earlier, like this is the core of it is a human issue. I shouldn't have to be an angel to like garner sympathy for my death, you know what I'm saying? Well, I'm sagging and got slugs in my mouth. My life is just as valuable as someone who has 3 degrees and got, tailored suits in their closet, that sort of thing. But I definitely feel like we have to be careful currently regarding, I don't want to say just the companies that we support, but just a lot of people, like anybody can make an ad or a commercial that says Black Lives Matter, you know what I'm saying? Black screen, big bold font. And not even necessarily, well, funding programs definitely is something that needs to be done, but I definitely feel like we need to be kind of cognizant of wherever we are 5 years from now. Definitely kind of depends on how we respond to not necessarily just certain criticisms, but how certain people kind of buy into the movement to a degree. And really quickly, in regard to like policy reform and policy change, it's always beneficial, but it's definitely kind of like imagine a hamster kind of in a wheel to a degree, to constantly, I feel like, reform a system that we already know kind of isn't built to like sustain us or to like nourish us to a degree. And we can reform, but it'll never be like 100. We can reform until it's like it could be 99% for us. That 1% at the foundation, it'll still be there. So I think part of wherever we see Black Lives Matter in kind of the country 5 years from now kind of garners a certain level of imagination, kind of imagining something we haven't lived in and haven't had the experience to live under. Basically imagining like a new tomorrow for the people that we actually want to profit from some of these changes that we actually want to take place, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Troy, for being here. And Dr. Barnes, if you could close us out with your final thoughts.
Yeah, so I think really Dr. Rickason pretty much said it. First, let me just say I would love to be in touch with all of you, even beyond this conversation. I think this is really powerful stuff, and I think all of you are very powerful people. So I appreciate having an opportunity to do this. Black lives have always mattered, and the question for me is, where does this remain, or where does this go in the angles of our consciousness? Do we go back to being comfortable once the pandemic is over and we get busy to getting back out and doing other stuff? Do we get comfortable again with, just the status quo? I think, people ask me a lot, and particularly my white friends ask me, well, what can I do? What should I be doing? We need to continue to have these conversations beyond this moment. And if we, I think the way that we make change beyond, the same conversations we've been having since the civil rights movement, Troy, I think you're absolutely right when you say that. I think the way we get past it is to not allow this to be a passing moment in time. That this can't be something that, my grandchildren read about as something that happened for, in 2020. This needs to be something that continues to happen, and it needs to stay at the forefront of our consciousness. And we need to continue to push for the legislation that we're talking about. We need to continue to vote at more than 15 to 20%. You know, we need to be at 100%, you know, of us need to vote all the time for every election, particularly the local ones. So if we can keep this at the forefront of our consciousness without going back to our complacency, then I think the Black Lives Matter paradigm will, as we see it today, will continue. If we get to a place where, you know, we're all back to our regular lives in a couple of months when there's a vaccine or whatever, and then we're all, you know, comfortable again, and then this stuff goes back out of the cycle, then we're going to be back, Troy, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years from now, asking these same questions. So we really have to be very intentional. All of us, everybody has to be very intentional about keeping these conversations moving strong. We have to continue to have these types of sessions. I can't wait till we can have them in person so that we can really get to, you know, touch and feel and see each other and have these kinds of powerful discussions. But we need to continue to do this without fail, even when we go back to a normal living environment.
Thank you so much. And I know that we are well over time, but I would just be remiss, and he is probably going to hurt me. I would just be remiss if I did not ask Dr. Turner if he just had a minute to say something on this subject. If you so choose, Dr. Turner, any final thoughts on anything you have heard our distinguished guests say this evening?
Well, first and foremost, gracious to everyone who joined and for their thoughts and their ideas, as well as the work that they're doing in their spaces. Hold on, my boss wants to say hi. What I would say is definitely the thing that comes to mind is about supporting each other and remembering to create community where there is not community, and also to make sure you're not just looking for an ally for yourself, but sometimes we have to be an ally to someone else. And I think that's the part that sometimes when we are in the midst of our fights, our turmoils, our storms, we reach out and grab a hand that might be holding our hand as well. So I would just encourage us all in the place you're in. If the community is not there, create the community and never be afraid to reach out and help someone, because you'll find a friend in this that may not even thought about it. And once again, Dr. B, continue to do this work, create the space so that this can happen and continue to move the conversation along.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for being here. And this concludes this week's segment of Dr. B's Thursday Thoughts.